right, it's me again. So hopefully, like I said, this earlier session was a big overview, may have been more information than you wanted. But we're going to start getting into some more of the stuff that you're doing today, as well as doing right now. So hopefully this will resonate a little more. Plus, as promised, this starts to get in a little more of the curriculum mapping as well as learning outcome section. So hopefully this will be more immediately perfect to you all. All right, so I want to talk about program power. And again, I'm using our institutional information to help frame this. You all have your own structure and everything, but for illustration purposes and also language purposes, sorry, I'm referring to program from a level perspective of we have a university, we have course level, intervention level, and then we kind of have this middle layer, which I'm just generally calling program. So, it can apply to concentrations, it can apply to whatever you want it to, but below university level, above course level. But there's power here. And for us, again, looking at our framework, this is our lever. This is the thing we build almost all of our assessment off of, because at the program level, you can then drill down to individual courses, but also at the program level, you can then roll it up to the university level and have that connection. And so for us, this is our level. There's a lot of power there, and that's a big common identifier between the university level as well as the course level. And it's usually with faculty, especially our program leaders, who are the ones that are more of our active assessment group. That's their mindset, is at the program level. So we're trying to capitalize off of that. But, I just covered this. So just to illustrate, if you're a visual learner, again, the more we know about what's happening there, the better we can contextualize what's going on at the course level, as well as at the program level, you can think of the contributions you're making to the university. So intentionally, the text is really small here because the point isn't about the text. But this is an example of one aspect of a curriculum map for one of our programs. Here on the, so, sorry, lasers. The program learning outcomes are here along the first column. Up here are the courses. So these are all the courses that make up this program. This is actually a graduate program. And then what we have the program do is they indicate then, so this is their program learning outcome number 1. Here's this class. They indicate the specific course learning outcome that connects to that PLO, right? So this first program learning outcome connects to CLO 5 in that course. So that they know if they wanted to look at how this program learning outcome shows up in this course, they know to look at the materials in that course connected to the course learning outcome 5, which it could be a reading, it could be a quiz, it could be a paper, but they know then when they look at the syllabus if they want to focus there. But I show this here to show then, the representativeness of the program learning outcomes across the course. And you might think, wow, this one is pretty standalone. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe that learning outcome is just very specific and it's only set up in one course, and that's kind of what that course is set to do. That's where, for me, I don't judge because I don't know that I'm not the subject matter expert, but that's where, when you have a curriculum map like this, you can ask those questions. Well, should this program learning outcome be showing up in more places? Is this more fundamental to the program than in that one course? And you just wouldn't necessarily know that if you didn't have all this information this way, because for us as an institution, some of this documentation has been maintained just through a lot of paper and a lot of Word documents, and so they're not that I'm saying all curriculum maps have to be visually represented, but it wasn't all put together. And so what our programs would do, like a year ago, is they would say, oh, okay, so yeah, we care about program learning outcome 1, so we're going to pull all these syllabi and then look in every single one of the syllabi where they mention PLL1. Like, well, that doesn't seem like the best use of your time. I said if you would have something like this, then you just would quickly know. And yes, so it takes the time of putting it all together. So this is where, again, like doing the work on the front end and makes things so much easier and more efficient later. Yeah, so this is the program and course level connection at our university. And then here's, again, the program learning outcomes. But then up here across the top are our university learning outcomes. And so here we don't ask for as much specificity because, again, the courses, we hope, have a very strong connection to the program. But the programs just need to be connected to the university level, right? Because the programs have no necessarily huge say over the university learning outcomes because that's for the university, right? Programs should have some say over their courses and their course content. So we don't ask for as much nuanced detail here, but we look for the connections. And so here we can see like this quantitative fluency only shows up once in relation to their program learning outcomes, which could be totally fine. Again, we don't look at this as a problem that some of the, like these two and these ones are more likely touched on. We just pose that into the program as well. Does this seem appropriate to you? Like this program in particular, for civic and global learning, only has one program learning outcome that connects to that. And so then I might say, okay, so that's your second learning outcome. Looks like that's pretty well represented throughout your program. So maybe you are integrating that civic and global learning perspective well throughout your program. But it's a good question for them to think about, and then a different lens for them to then examine their content. And so this gets back to my point of everything I'm talking about here is not necessarily an assessment conversation. That's just a curriculum, thinking about your program and what it should be covering question. But where assessment can come in is when you start collecting data from a particular course or about a particular program learning outcome, you then can see the connections of what that would have at the course level and the course learning outcomes as well as at the university level. So like I said before, the curriculum connections have a lot of value. Again, like the metaphor I used before, it's a program blueprint. It provides an opportunity for curriculum review. It gives institutional context and sense of identity. And one of the things too that I think is pretty neat, that I started to mention this before and cut myself off, but when you bring in a new faculty member, and maybe they're just an adjunct teaching one course, what a cool way to give them context to how that course fits into the university, right? You could say, like, even though you're only teaching English 101, here's where that fits within this program or within the institution, and that's pretty powerful. And one of the things we know adjunct faculty members struggle with is a sense of community at the institution. And what a great way to give them some of that identity and community in seeing the bigger picture, even if all they're doing is teaching that one course, that one section. So again, just some cool byproducts to this work. So the other piece, because I'm talking so much about the program level, right? There's value in the other levels too. When you're getting the data at any of the levels, university level, program level, course level, you can always aggregate it, right? So if there's 5 sections of one course that run, you can look at the data from those 5 sections, put it all together, and say, yeah, generally students in those courses are doing well, or they're doing well on this assignment. You can also disaggregate that data, right? So sometimes it's good to see the aggregated picture to know students are generally learning, with this final assignment in this class. But sometimes it's important to break it down and see, well, even though students are generally learning and the average is students are doing well, maybe in a certain course section they're not, or maybe certain student populations are not doing so well in this with this assignment in this program. And that's good to know, right? I'm not saying you always have to look at every nuanced detail of and always break the data down, because sometimes you need to have the aggregate picture, but just know that the aggregate picture doesn't tell the full story. And so that, again, in thinking about when you have your data, even if you're meeting all your targets collectively, you may not be meeting these targets. You know, as you think about different student populations and how they're performing, different modalities, you know, does an online class, some of the students learning and performing at the same level online as they are in person. Do you all have multiple locations? Offsite locations, knowing that, you know, students are getting an equivalent learning experience there as they are here. So it's important to keep in mind, and that this type of information matters at any level, right? Course, program, or university. Any questions about it? I'm just going to roll into then talking specifically about learning outcomes. Yeah.
I have a question. When we talk about data, does data, let's say we are looking at a piece of data, and the data can also be positive. I mean, data does not have to be negative. And we may have met our piece of assessment, and that is okay. And I appreciate the fact that you're talking about that assessment data can always be positive. And I could have met that also as well, correct?
Yeah, and what I would say too, as a clarification, is that data is not charged one way or another. Data is data. It's not positive, it's not negative. The data is the data. You all ascribe value to that data based off of your targets, based off of your perspectives and your interpretation of it. Because again, like I said, let's pick on, do you all do the SESI? So SESI data, let's say your students score 80% on a certain thing. You all might think that's fantastic. But then you look at the national average, and maybe the average is 85. Or maybe the average is 75. And maybe initially you thought the 80 was low, but then you see the average, right? So the data is the data. Like, your students scored 80 on that, regardless of whether you think that's good or bad, right? Nothing's going to change the fact that they scored 80. But it's the meaning you're putting on that. And so one of the things that I also try and say is, even if you're meeting your target, you know, when it comes to targets and success criteria, I try not to think in terms of good and bad, and I try and think of, you know, things to celebrate and things to focus on. Because, you know, I have to counsel some folks when they get their results and they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't hit any of our targets. Like, okay, so what are we going to do about that? And even from, you know, again, thinking the you know, most dire circumstances, the HLC does not care if you don't hit all your learning targets. What they care about is that you're doing something about it. Even if you are hitting all your targets, if you're not taking action, they care about that. So there's some institutions that are blindsided when accreditors put them on notice, because they're like, well, what? Look at all our targets, we're meeting all of them. Right, but then all you're doing is you're turning in your report and walking away. You're not sharing with students, you're not digging deeper, you're not thinking about, okay, well, overall our students are learning, but gosh, you know, how are our adult students doing versus our daytime, you know, how are our evening students doing versus our daytime students? Because accreditors look at your full picture, so if they know you're struggling with a certain enrollment population or retention strategy, they're going to wonder, well, why aren't you looking at that with your assessment data? Especially if you're meeting all your targets, right? So yeah, sorry I went down that little rabbit hole, but yeah, I always try and position data as the data is what it is. Now then, based on your targets, what does that mean? And so yeah, but absolutely, we should be sure to celebrate the data that we're proud of. But we should also not shy away from the data that is indicating where we need to focus a little more. Because that's one of the things that institutions can fall into the trap of. You know, I appreciate you thinking that folks will be, because certainly folks have a deficit mindset, but there's a lot of institutions that they'll only share the good assessment data, the things they're proud of, and they'll never talk about the areas to improve, which I don't think is all that very helpful. I mean, you don't always want to only talk about one or the other. You should have a nice balance.
I'm sorry, it's not totally clear in the second map. Can you go back to that? Can you just explain? So is that map showing where the program learning outcomes are mapped to the gen ed outcomes? Is that what that's showing?
Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. I mean, they're not our gen ed outcomes, but
Okay. For us, that would be.
yeah, but for you all, it would be. So that's showing, even though, you know, these are very specific program learning outcomes for the program, they're showing how they connect to these larger outcomes. Not necessarily that, you know, the assignments, because, you know, if we're picking on like this first one, we go to this, like this first class, you know, again, at the course level, when you're building an assignment, one, that assignment should connect to CLO 5, but it should also be reflecting, you know, the program learning outcome. Now you get into the question of, well, should it also be reflecting the university outcome? Well, that becomes pretty removed from a course level assignment, but you should still know where that alignment is. And actually, one thing that I have this 3-part test that I give our faculty so that I don't get back maps where there's X's everywhere. Because no offense to faculty, but sometimes you think your course is everything to everyone and everything. When in reality, it's not always, and that's okay. That's why we have multiple courses, because if your class was everything to everyone, then it'd be required for everyone and everything. But the 3-part test is, first, is the learning outcome present, right? So not to pick on math, but if a math faculty member has an assignment where they're having a student you know, use a certain theorem, and the student has to write their answer, you know, written communication. Yes, it is present. When I get that paper back, students are demonstrating written communication. Great, you passed the first part of the test. Second part of the test, did you intentionally try to promote learning of written communication? Well, probably not. Probably that test was about the theorem and them applying the theorem. So maybe it was quantitative or maybe critical thinking, but you weren't really trying to help their written communication. And so I would say you don't pass the second part of the test, of my test, so you don't even move to the third. And so you wouldn't map it. You wouldn't map a connection there. The third part of the test is, would you feel comfortable defending that connection? So if you find out that students are not doing well there, would you stand by that and say, yeah, I know as a math faculty member, I need to do better in preparing my students with their written communication? You might say, no, that's, you know, that is outside the bounds of my course or that assignment. And so if you don't feel comfortable, then that can also be the disqualifier from mapping. But those are the 3 things that I'll ask faculty, because sometimes they'll go, oh yeah, this PLO, it hits on all these things. Or this course, this assignment, it covers everything. It's like, okay, you know, let's not try, because that's the thing, I'm not counting. There's not a threshold or a minimum or maximum that I have. You know, I want the curriculum maps to reflect the curriculum, so that then we can actually use it to reflect on the program and the content. All right, so learning outcomes. These are 2 different ways to think about it. Lauren said you all have a rubric about writing your learning outcomes, so please do not think you have to deviate from that. These are just different ways to think about it. One way is ABCD approach. So in your articulation of your learning outcomes, you say who your audience is, you say the behavior that you're expecting to see, you say the condition under which the behavior should be demonstrated, and the degree. So it's not enough to say students will be able to identify utensils to use in cooking a dish. It's that they'll be able to identify at least 5 utensils, right? So that's where the degree piece comes in, just as a quick example. Another way to think about it, if you don't like the alphabet style, is who, what, when, where, and why. So who is this learning outcome pertaining, right? Because be careful with students. Well, I know at our institution, you know, if it's a graduate program, I'm going to say graduate students, because that's who your students are. Or say, you know, that, and this maybe comes a little bit more with some of our student affairs services, but say like the transfer students, if you're doing transfer student stuff. So who, what, so what is the learning? What is the knowledge, skill, or behavior that you're expecting to see? When and where are you expecting to see it? Right? Is this supposed to happen as a result of a certain thing, or at the end of the program, middle of the program? And then the why piece. So why would a student be demonstrating this knowledge? Well, it's as a result of completing this class, or as a result of completing this program, or as a result of hitting this milestone in their academic journey. But these are things that should, that's why there's a lot of focus on writing out your learning outcomes. You don't just say like, yeah, students will understand math. Well, that's a big statement. How are we going to measure that? And so here's another way when you put those pieces in practice. Some people do, as a result of the intervention, whoever your audience is, students will be able to blank to a certain degree. You could also say students will blank as a result of. You don't have to write them all the same way. You can also flip-flop and go, like sometimes people are like, oh, well, if I were going to write this, I really feel like I have to talk about the students first. Great, yeah, it doesn't matter what order you have these in, just have these things. There's a lot of taxonomies you can use. I don't know if you all are pushing Bloom's. It really doesn't matter. The important thing about the language is that you're being specific. So really try not to use words like know, understand, because what does that mean? Like understanding. There's a difference between somebody being able to identify something, somebody being able to summarize something, somebody being able to differentiate it from something else or critique it, right? So all of those verbs I just gave could fall under understanding, and if you just say understand, well, then we don't know the extent with which you're expecting understanding. So choose a taxonomy, or just have a dictionary or thesaurus handy. Where taxonomies really come in handy is they help try and differentiate level of learning, right? Because an entry-level class should have lower level learning than a class right before the student graduates, right? Or if there's a sequence of courses, you're expecting higher level learning later in the sequence than you are at the front end. And so be intentional with your language there, because otherwise you can get tripped up, or you can be setting too low of expectations or too high of expectations of your students. One of the things we recently did, I know you all are revising your gen ed outcomes. So having revised university learning outcomes, I can tell you it's possible to get through it, and it's great on the other side. But we recently adopted the degree qualifications profile to upgrade our university learning outcomes. And this is just an example of one of the themes of the degree qualifications profile. So the shorthand name is specialized knowledge, which, what does that mean? So they then give this little paragraph here to further explain it. And then, if that's not enough, they then break it down by degree level. And so this is a really good example of how, at the associate's level, they say that you'll describe the scope of the field and core theories. At the bachelor's level, they're expecting you not just to describe it, but to define and explain it. And then at the master's level, elucidate on the topic. And I'm not saying you have to use these terms or that you can't define and explain at the associate's level, but this is just a very clear example of that progression of learning, right? And so that's why the language you use matters on these pieces. Ultimately, then, when you look to measure them and what you expect to see happen. Yeah. I think that's it. We had some activities, but I think we're doing those later. So,
Any questions at this point? is there ever a point where, like, I could see maybe math might not hit all of the institutional level?
Yeah.
issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, and that'll give me a chance to expand a bit more on when it comes to mapping. Again, what I care about is curriculum mapping being accurate, because that then gives us a sense of, for university learning outcomes or for gen ed, where that's showing up. And we know that, say you're like a math class isn't necessarily going to cover like diversity-related concepts, or it may not cover potentially it may not cover like oral communication, right? And that's okay, because that's, the math class is designed to do certain things, and we can see what it's designed to do by knowing its alignment. But to your point about should it do more, or what does this mean potentially for the, that's where having that map and knowing those connections is helpful, because then the university can take a step back and go, okay, well, maybe we're not going to change this math class, but maybe we recognize we need more of a civic engagement component at the university. And across our curriculum, very few courses and programs are aligning to this. And we think that's a problem, because this is our university learning outcome, or our gen ed outcome, and it's not showing up in the curriculum, and it needs to. And so then that's a bigger conversation of, well, where should it show up? And I would hope it'd be a collaborative conversation with the programs to hear their perspective of where it would be. We're actually going through that right now with, so I said we adopted the degree qualifications profile. Just to expand a little more on what that is, the Lumina Foundation and NILOA came together, and they got some brilliant thought leaders, and they put together this framework with the idea of, let's try to commonly define things like critical thinking, right? And let's try and actually do that. So they made this framework with these, it's actually 5 themes: specialized knowledge, broad integrative knowledge, intellectual skills, which they break down in a lot of ways, applied and collaborative learning, civic and global learning. They put that together, and then they put it out in the field and got feedback. I think the first published version came out in 2014. Since then, they've revised it because institutions tried to use it, had a lot of feedback. They revised it, and so there was another version that came out, I think in 2016. But this profile, these themes, are used by over 1,000 universities now. Now, the use of them wildly varies. I worked at one institution where we did not adopt these, but what we did was we took them and looked at the program, and that's where we really used this. We really used this because we wanted to try and use this information to gauge, well, are the outcomes we have at the master's level appropriately differentiated from the bachelor's level? And so we didn't adopt this, but we said, well, specialized knowledge. All right, so let's get our business program, and let's have them look at this information, look at their outcomes, look at some of the language used here, and make sure that we're somewhat on the same page. And also think, if we feel like we're covering this, are we actually covering it? Are there ideas here that we can borrow and infuse into our program? So that's one way institutions can use it. Another way is institutions might adopt like one of these themes. But what we actually did, so sorry, the background of the DQP, but for us, we had this professional behavior theme that we thought to add. And so one of the things with the degree qualification profile is they'll tell institutions, if there's something, this is a framework that you can add to. So if there's something at your institution that's important, that is part of your curriculum, part of who you are, add it. Because we made this framework for everyone, but we know there's others. And so there's a lot of, like say, a faith-based institution that might be well embedded in their curriculum. And so they should have something which wouldn't be covered here, so they should make their own theme, something about faith. So for us, we had this undergraduate pathway program that was kind of a pilot, and they embraced this before the university, and so they added at the associate's level this professional behavior theme. And so when we adopted these for the university, we recognized, well, we have this other theme hanging out there at the associate's level. Does this apply to bachelor's level and master's level? And we asked our faculty, and without really digging into it, some of them said, absolutely, that applies. Others said, no. Like professional skills, like that's covered in the other stuff, or that's just embedded in what we do. We wouldn't need a separate theme for it. So what we're doing right now is we have all the programs, because we just adopted these, it was approved by our faculty senate in the spring, and this summer we had all our programs mapped to it. And so now that we have this mapping, we're actually looking across the university and breaking it down by program level to see, well, how well do we align to that? And is it worth expanding out, having definitions at multiple degree levels versus saying, no, you know what? That associate's program really believed in it, and that's cool, and they can have like a program level outcome if they want, but the rest of the university really doesn't align to that. And so that should not be a university learning outcome for us. But for us, we kind of adopted this with a pilot mentality of, well, we're going to review the curriculum mapping and see. Because for us, we weren't wholly sure that this should be adopted across the university. Now, the rest of these we were. So if there was a program that doesn't align to one of these, well, then we talk to that program and say, somewhere you got to put this in. But the degree to which they align to it is in a lot of ways up to them. Unless like our faculty senate or our university curriculum committee comes up with some type of agreed upon minimum. But for us, we said, no, these are university level outcomes, you should align to them in some way, even if just once. And then for you and your programs to say, well, you know what, yeah, we should do more with civic and global learning. That is something that's coming up and being more relevant in our field. I'm surprised we don't have more of it here. So that's something for us to work on.
I have a question. When you look at your curriculum maps and all that, you have PLOs, program outcomes, but then you also have SLOs, student learning outcomes. How do you look at the relationship between student learning outcomes and program learning outcomes? In your mind, to me, they are different. That the student learning outcomes are meant to help develop your PLOs. But I noticed under one map they look the same in your definition. So what is your definition and differentiation of those?
Yeah, so for us, program learning outcomes are student learning outcomes at the program level.
Yes.
We have course learning outcomes that are student learning outcomes at the course level. I want to make sure we're not talking about like programmatic goals or objectives, or even like, you think about a class, there's teacher objectives, right? Of like, this class will cover this material, right? That's a course objective or a teaching objective. That's not a student learning objective. A student learning objective would be, well, because this class is supposed to cover writing a business plan, students will be able to write a business plan, right? So yeah, we don't always have the word student in front of, but yeah, program learning outcomes are student learning outcomes at the program level. And then we have the course learning outcomes.
That's the same vocabulary we're using. Student learning outcomes, but at the program level and then at the course level. So all of our documentation currently says program level, student learning outcomes. Thanks. Any other questions? I know there's gonna be a lot of time and space to ask Jill questions, but I just want to see, is there anything else at this point before we dive into the hands-on workshop?
In the program outcomes for the students and the objectives versus goals, objectives versus outcomes, would we be using the word student or should we be using the word graduates will? Because it's at the end.
So that is going to differ
Okay.
across, like even in this room,
Okay.
because for some programs here, we have a lot of transferring out that happens before they graduate. So we're really going to be looking at kind of just later in the program, right? Not necessarily graduates.
Okay. We're graduates of a career tech program. That might be
We're okay with that language.
Okay.
And I think too about it's a great caveat because I always, I had to throw out the caveat to our College of Education because they use the term candidates, because when they say students, they're talking about the students that are in the classroom of the teacher who's in the program, right? So for them, all their learning outcomes are for the candidate, which is like the teacher getting this degree. And whenever they say student, that's, well, the candidate will be able to use multiple instructional styles with their students, right? So with our College of Education, candidate is thrown around all the time, and student is maybe not always the operative audience. So yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point to, and again, that's why audience and the who is an important thing to be clear on with your learning outcomes, so that
Thank you.
we're all good.
All right. Well, I think it's appropriate time for an applause, so thank you so much, Joe. All right, so now is the kind of phase where we're going to transition towards the hands-on portion of the workshop. So if you look at the agenda, we're going to transition to this time before lunch. We're going to start diving in. I have a few instructions in order to set us up. So this is going to be the portion where just kind of setting you up with how we've designed this, right? Our vision for what we're doing. And at the end of this portion of me talking, you should have a very, very clear idea of the resources that are available to you right now, and then also the materials that you should be using right now, and the outcome of this session right now, right? So that's what we're covering here. And then the rest of the time after I'm done talking is really going to be designed as this open working session for you to get this work accomplished. So this first portion before lunch and then through lunch, we kind of build it as a working lunch because we'll grab food and be working. Joe is going to be a resource for you, as well as myself and Christopher. So if you have questions, those are the point people to reach out to. Raise your hand, yell your name, whatever you need to do. We will be here supporting you. And then after lunch is when we're going to transition. If you have signed up for a one-on-one appointment, Joe is going to be in the room next door, and we will be having people who have scheduled their one-on-one appointments today to really dive in, ask questions. That will be the space right next door in 203 where those one-on-one appointments will take place. I highly encourage you, right, to stay for as long as needed. I will be physically in this room till 4 p.m. I would encourage you to, get as much work accomplished today. When we were envisioning this project plan and for this semester, that's how we designed it, was the work to be done in a supportive environment. Obviously, if you have other obligations, childcare, that's we definitely understand that. But I would encourage you to stay as long as possible to get the work done here in this supported space. Because moving forward, while we're absolutely accommodating and supporting people outside of this space, I am one individual. I do have a full-time job here, right? And so, we're just going to be outside of this space. I'm here, Joe's here, Christopher's here, we're all here to help you. If you leave this space and then attempt to, later in the next 2 weeks to get support, again, I'm just one individual, Christopher's just one individual, we have full-time jobs, so we will absolutely do the best we can to support you, but this is where the resources are right now, so just to encourage you in that. So really, really tangibly, right, here are our next steps. In your folders, you have deliverable instructions. So that is a page that is designed to tell you exactly what is expected from you today. You also, in your folder, have a copy of the rubric. I sent that out via email, but I wanted to give you a physical copy. The MET column is this whole rubric is what the assessment committee will be using to evaluate your outcomes, but we are going for that MET column, right? So if you look through where you meet expectations, that rubric is going to tell you what we are going to be looking for, right? So there's no surprises, there's no gotcha moment. That is what we're looking for. So if you give us outcomes that fit that, you will be good to go, right? And so we will be providing feedback on that, and those instructions, that deliverable instructions, give you step-by-step of what you need to do and how to submit those outcomes. So if there's any questions on that, please read through the deliverable instructions, flag one of us down, let us know. I can answer those questions, Christopher can answer those questions, and so can Pamela. But that's maybe that sheet that's going to guide you. Now, really quickly, I'm going to cover the materials available to you. Pamela did an incredible job compiling these resources. So I just want to say thank you to her because everything you're about to get is from her. She did an amazing job putting this together. So here are the resources that are available to you. But we have laptop cards, right? So those laptops are free to use. As soon as I'm done, you can start grabbing those. You can pass them out. Those laptops, if you did not bring your own, are there for you to use. On that laptop, or soon to be on that laptop, we have USBs that have this folder, right? So I'm just going to walk you through how you're going to use this. If you have your own laptop, you can click and drag from the USB file, the USB drive onto your own personal laptop. If you have one of the school's institution's laptops, you're going to plug the USB in, drag this folder onto the computer. When you open up that folder for workshop materials, you're going to see divisions of the college, right? Arts and science, business and technology, health careers. Go ahead and click on yours. Then you'll see your name, right? Pamela's amazing, I can't even tell you, right? She's just incredible. So you'll go ahead, I'm gonna pick on Maxie because he's first, right? And so you're gonna take your name, and actually what you can do, this is actually probably a more efficient way, is just click and drag your name onto the computer, right? Don't even do the whole thing, right? Go ahead, open your name from the USB drive, and then just go ahead and click the folder with your name. You don't need everyone's, just yours, right? So go ahead, click your name, and drag that onto the laptop. Then what you will have, you'll have a digital copy of the deliverable instructions in case you lose the physical one in front of you. The workshop materials, support materials, it's going to include a lot of the documentation, right? The agenda, some of the mapping documents for you to take a look at, the program learning outcomes document, and some other just reference material for you. Your program area, so for example, for Maxie, this is going to be foreign languages. You are going to have your deliverable document. This is the curriculum proposal form that's going to be the end deliverable for you for this part of the stipend. So the curriculum proposal form, this is the revised curriculum proposal form that includes the place for program objectives. Pamela has filled out as much as kind of this draft document as possible. The areas that are going to be highlighted are going to be the areas that you need to fill out. Most of this information, other than the program learning outcomes here, should be on your existing curriculum proposal form that you can access through the curriculum's website. Okay, so you can fill that out. If you have questions on filling this out, please let me know. It should be a lot of copying and pasting and filling out, except for where we have program learning outcomes. This is where we need those outcomes from you. All right, so use this as your end deliverable form. Okay, work on the outcomes and writing and drafting them. If you have a legal pad, that's how you best work, that's fine. If you're working in a Word document, that's fine. This is the end deliverable. This is how the assessment committee will be evaluating your outcomes. This is what's going to get passed on to the deans at the end by the deadline. This is what goes through the curriculum process to become part of our institutional documentation. Okay, so that form is there for you, as well as in this workshop binder, all of your catalog page is in there, and it's bookmarked, right? There, catalog page, your program outcomes if they are existing. So when I asked you guys to send them, right? This is what this became. If there are existing program outcomes, they are here. And then all of your program-related course outcomes. So we did not include gen eds here, but all the, right, wow, right? Yes, yes, another round of applause for Pamela. So this should be everything that you need to take a look at the courses that are program-specific, take a look at your catalog page, take a look at, again, if you have existing program outcomes, they are there. Use that bookmark tool to kind of click through, but you should have everything you need to create your program level outcomes or to refer to and revise your program level outcomes, right? So I know it's a lot of documentation. I want you to be able to like click through and look at it, but explore this because this is all going to be helpful in creating those. Again, the next steps, right? So just very tangibly, we have the USB drives that have this material on it. So if you have a personal computer, you can just grab the USB drive. We are going to have to share. There's not enough for everyone to have their own individual one, but kind of click and drag and then pass it on to the next person. If you need a laptop, you can come grab one of those, stick the USB drive in, drag your name over to the computer, and then pass the USB drive on. Yes? Yes. Outcomes. So objectives, and that had been on the curriculum form previously. What we added.
Can we get those?
Yeah, you can refer to your previous curriculum forms for them.
Put it in there?
Correct. Yeah, we filled out as much as possible, right? But we not customized to each program, right? So that we filled out as much as possible that was generally applicable. Anything that's program specific, you'll need to fill in. The only thing that should be new on there is the outcomes. Everything else should be able to be copy and pasted from previous forms. Yes?
If you did bring a laptop, it makes sure to be on your.
So let me reiterate. So the institution's laptops that are here right now, all of this information is on a USB. If you have a personal laptop, you take the USB, plug it in, click and drag to your personal laptop. If you're using an institution's laptop, stick the USB in, click and drag, and use it on an institution's laptop. Does that make sense? So come grab a laptop and we'll get it loaded on for you. Okay? All right, let's get to work. Thank you.
Awesome.
Isn't she amazing? She's incredible.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We tried to make it.
Can I grab it before anybody else?
Smart move.
I just had a question on this here. So, I don't want to duplicate things. So I have I had 6. The one circle are the same in the city. All should I, or should I have some capital? Yeah, so that's all the courses in personal training will count towards the and they can't share out. You should put it in both places. So I don't. Yeah. Yeah. They are going to get this knowledge, right? So they're going to do this. And the degree program to do reflective addition and then the degree program to be able to add plus the additional
I have a question for you. So I'm going to do the answers. So we have Mark. Point of view. We have questions for us now. So it's about pages 30. So central candidate courses are in there. Do you take it and then they get a certificate? Technical or electronics? Right?
It's the immediate in the courses that are being bold. Then do you right? If they don't certificate, well, why would you get a certificate and not the free program? If we're putting that on a certificate program,
Right.
well,
But that doesn't come back in.
why would we all work structure technology? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you put it in both.
Either both or
You know what I see with program? Some of them are right.
Does that make sense? So it all comes down to what are you basically.
We share classes, yeah, differences in schedule. So my main focus was it's okay if they duplicate learning objectives.
They should.
Are they told you to? Oh, now you're my favorite. No, I probably won't. I changed my mind on that.
So.
But it's not costly, but
Yeah. So for the
Pamper judgment.
Yeah.
That certificate is plumbing, because it's stackable to about the charging because they can take off.
I see it there.